You arrive at the training school at 18 with a medical certificate and a willingness to lift heavy objects. You spend 6 months learning to tie knots that will not slip under load, to read decompression tables, and to identify the symptoms of oxygen toxicity. You swim laps in a pool until your shoulders burn, and you sit in classrooms where instructors draw diagrams of the human circulatory system on whiteboards. You learn that nitrogen becomes poison under pressure and that helium replaces it but steals your body heat. You pass your exams and sign your first contract. You start as a deckhand on a saturation barge in the Gulf of Mexico. Your alarm rings at 4:30 in the morning. You pull on steel-toed boots and a fluorescent vest and report to the equipment room. Your job is to check every rubber seal on the diving helmets for cracks, to test the communication systems by speaking into headsets and listening for static, and to stack the gas racks that contain the helium and oxygen mixtures. You haul umbilicals, thick hoses weighing 80 pounds per meter, across the deck and coil them carefully so they do not kink. You watch the saturation complex, which looks like a cluster of horizontal tanks welded together, and you see the divers inside through small portholes. They wave at you while they eat breakfast. You wave back. You are not part of their world yet. You sleep in a bunkhouse with 12 other men, the air conditioning running constantly to combat the heat, and you earn just enough to justify the sunburn and the back pain. After 18 months, you test for tender. This is your first step inside the system. You enter the saturation complex during the surface interval, while the divers are still at atmospheric pressure. You learn to operate the gas reclaim unit, which scrubs the expensive helium from the chamber atmosphere and recycles it. You prepare meals in the galley, sealing sandwiches and coffee thermoses into cylindrical containers called food locks, which you slide into the chamber through small pressure hatches. You listen to the divers speak through the intercom, their voices high and distorted from the helium, and you start to understand the slang. They call the chamber the tin, the underwater habitat the bottom, and decompression the blow. You clean the toilet, which is a special unit that holds waste under pressure until it can be discharged safely. You learn that living in a metal tube with 2 other men for a month requires patience and the ability to sleep through snoring. You advance to bellman after 3 years. Now you work on the wet porch, the transition zone between the chamber and the sea. You wear coveralls that never quite dry out. Your shift lasts 12 hours. You monitor the diving bell, a steel sphere that rides on a cable to the seabed. Before each dive, you check the emergency gas supply, the hot water machine that will keep the diver from freezing, and the video feeds. When the diver climbs into the bell, you seal the hatch behind him and flood the space between the bell and the chamber. You watch the pressure gauges climb. You speak to him through the communication system, your voice calm and clear, telling him his descent rate and his depth. At 200 meters, the pressure is 20 times what you feel on the surface. You feed out the umbilical, which carries his breathing gas, his electricity, and his lifeline to the surface. You watch the video screen as he works in the dark water, manipulating tools with clumsy gloves. If the umbilical snags on underwater debris, you feel the tug in your hands. You have 30 seconds to respond before the line goes taut and pulls him off his feet. You manage his ascent carefully, watching for signs of decompression sickness in his movements. When he returns to the bell, he is exhausted, sometimes shaking from the cold despite the hot water suit. You help him strip off the gear, check him for injuries, and lock him back into the chamber. Then you clean the bell and prepare for the next dive. You go to diving school for 6 months to earn your commercial certification. You learn to use underwater welding torches that burn at thousands of degrees, to operate hydraulic nut runners the size of car engines, and to inspect pipeline welds using magnetic particle testing. You memorize the US Navy dive tables and learn to calculate gas densities in your head. When you return to the barge, you enter the saturation system for the first time as a diver. Compression takes 3 days. You enter the living chamber with 2 other men. The space is 12 meters long and 2 meters in diameter. You have a bunk bed, a small table, and a television that plays movies from hard drives. You cannot stand up straight in the middle. The life support technician starts the compression, and you feel the pressure increase in your ears. You swallow constantly and chew gum to equalize. Your voice rises in pitch as the helium replaces the nitrogen in your lungs. By the time you reach 100 meters, you sound like a cartoon character. The chamber has an unscrambler on the communication system so the surface crew can understand you. But among yourselves, you speak in high-pitched chirps. Your first dive is to 120 meters. You wake at 6 in the morning, though morning is just a clock setting because the sun never touches you. You eat a breakfast of eggs and bacon passed through the food lock. It tastes slightly of metal and plastic. You put on a thermal underwear layer, then a neoprene suit, then the hot water suit. which is a rubber membrane with tubes running through it. The bellman helps you don the helmet, which weighs 32 pounds on the surface. You climb into the bell, which is cramped and smells of oil and sweat. The bellman seals the hatch. You hear the pumps engage, and you descend. The drop takes 40 minutes. You watch the water outside the porthole change from green to blue to black. At 80 meters, you see bioluminescent creatures drifting past. The temperature drops to 4 degrees Celsius. Your hot water suit pumps heated water through the tubes, keeping your core warm, but your hands and face still feel the cold. You hit the bottom and the bellman floods the trunk, equalizing the pressure so you can open the bottom hatch. You step out onto the seabed, which is mud and silt. Your boot sinks 6 inches. You are working on a pipeline flange, tightening bolts on a new valve assembly. Your hands move slowly because of the pressure and the thick gloves. Every movement requires effort. You check your gauges constantly, breathing gas pressure, carbon dioxide scrubber status, hot water flow. You have 4 hours of bottom time. The darkness surrounds you except for the cone of light from your helmet lamp. Fish move in and out of the beam, eyeing you with curiosity. You work until your fingers go numb. You signal the surface that you are returning to the bell. You climb back up. The bellman seals the hatch, and you begin the hour-long ride back to the living depth. You transfer back into the chamber, strip off the wet gear, and shower with fresh water, which is precious and rationed. You eat lunch while your body remains saturated with inert gas. You cannot leave. If you surface now, the gas would bubble in your blood like shaking a soda can. You would die in agony. So you stay. You nap. You read. You wait for the evening dive. You do this twice a day for 28 days. You learn to sleep despite the constant hiss of gas, the whir of the carbon dioxide scrubbers, and the snoring of your chambermates. You learn to use the toilet, which is a complicated process involving valves and buckets because the system must maintain pressure. You play cards for hours, betting small amounts of money you cannot spend until you surface. You exercise by doing push-ups and squats in the narrow space. Your body adjusts to the pressure. Your joints ache in the mornings. Your appetite increases because your body works harder to stay warm. You lose weight despite eating 4,000 calories a day. After 5 years, you earn your deep certification. Now you work at 250 meters. The pressure is 25 atmospheres. The dives are shorter, 90 minutes instead of 4 hours, because the gas becomes denser and harder to breathe. You use trimix now, blending helium, nitrogen, and oxygen in precise ratios. You work on blowout preventers and subsea trees, massive structures that control the flow of oil from the wellhead. The work is technical. You use remotely operated vehicles to assist you, guiding them with joysticks while you work with your hands. You see sharks occasionally, but they ignore you. You see the damage that trawler nets do to pipelines. You feel the current pull at you when you work in open water. You know 3 men who have died. One got his umbilical tangled in a thruster and was pulled into the blades. Another ignored the symptoms of a tension pneumothorax and surfaced too fast. The third had a heart attack on the bottom, and the bellman could not get him back in time. You do not think about them when you dive, but you remember their names when you check your equipment. You are meticulous about your gear. You check your harness 3 times. You test your communications before every dive. You never hurry. The company promotes you to supervisor after 8 years. You move into the control room, which is air-conditioned and dry. You sit in front of 6 monitors showing camera feeds from the bells, digital readouts of chamber pressures, and gas analysis charts. You wear a headset and speak to the divers all day, your voice unscrambled but calm. You manage the gas panel, calculating the partial pressures of oxygen to prevent hypoxia or convulsions. You watch the weather radar. If wind speeds exceed 30 knots, you abort the dive and bring the bell up. If a diver reports tingling in his fingers, you bring him up immediately and start him on oxygen therapy. You fill out incident reports. You argue with clients who want to push the schedule. You sleep in a cabin on the ship, but you set an alarm every 3 hours to check the chamber pressures. You work as a supervisor for 10 years. You supervise 100 saturations. You see men get bent despite your best calculations, and you watch them go into the hyperbaric chamber for treatment, hoping the bubbles in their joints dissolve before permanent damage occurs. You fire a diver who showed up drunk. You commend a bellman who saved his partner by cutting an umbilical seconds before it pulled him into a structure. You learn the bureaucracy of the oil industry, the safety audits, the insurance forms, the environmental compliance checks. You become a superintendent. You wear a collared shirt and work from an office in Aberdeen or Houston. You bid on contracts worth millions of dollars, calculating the cost of helium and the daily rate for the vessel. You hire the crews. reading resumes and checking certifications. You visit the barges once a month to inspect the equipment. You run your hands over the chamber seals, checking for metal fatigue. You review the medical records. You handle the phone calls when something goes wrong. You negotiate with the families when there is an accident. You make a salary that allows you to buy a house and send your children to university. But you rarely see the ocean anymore.